Welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast. Whether you're a first-time facilitator or a seasoned pro, listen in for tips and tricks to make a bigger impact at the next workshop you deliver. And now, your host, she never hits the snooze button, Leanne Hughes.
Hello and welcome to the First Time Virtual Facilitator podcast. I'm your host, Leanne Hughes, and I'm here to help you host virtual meetings and events. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast for some time, you'll recognize that my usual tagline is to help you create unpredictable workshop experiences that predictably work. But for the moment, I've decided to do a mini pivot because absolutely everyone is asking me how to create and take their offline experiences and move them online. I hope that you're going okay wherever you're listening in from, that you're taking every day as it comes, and also being really kind to yourself. So if you can, just try, I know I shouldn't give advice, as my favourite author Michael Bungay Stanier says in his book, The Advice Trap, but I'm finding that being kind to yourself is probably the most important thing, and to not put pressure on yourself to have the same levels of productivity and being responsive. I think let's just take each day as it comes and really, as Murray said on my previous show, focus on what we can control. Today's guest, Jonas Rajanto, is affectionately known as the remote meeting guy. And he's also having many people ask him this question of how to move offline experiences online, and you'll hear in this interview how his life has changed and his work priorities have shifted over the last 10 days. And for you, the listener, I want to let you know that I'm shifting content as we go through this time. I've got a lot of pre-recorded interviews that I will release through this, but I want to support you as we go through all of these changes. And at the moment, the focus does seem to be on shifting to virtual. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to release the other episodes. It's just that I'll probably actually even do more episodes. So maybe twice weekly or bonuses when I feel the timing is right. And if you want to keep up to date with all those episode releases, probably the best way and easiest way to do that is to subscribe to the podcast so you get alerted when the bonus episodes do drop. Before I get introducing Jonas and what we share in this episode, a couple of things I'd like to highlight. I think now more than ever, community is really important, and we do have a free Facebook group. It's called The Flip Chart. We ran our first virtual happy hour on Friday. That was absolutely awesome. We had, I think at one stage, we had about 16 people on the call. A lot from over in Europe, which was fantastic. So they were getting up and drinking tea and coffees. And Thomas and I in Australia we were on the happy hour drinks. But yeah, it was just really nice. And I think I'd like to thank Mish, who kicked things off. It was, while we're waiting for people to join, there was sort of a bit of conversation. And then she asked a really great opening icebreaker question, which is, tell us a story about the coffee mug that you're drinking from. And that really opened up the conversation. And then we actually, of course, started playing icebreaker games and getting into it as facilitators do. It was self-managed. I wanted to have no agenda. I didn't want to officially host. And I love that everyone contributed to that. We had someone from Vancouver that dialed in. Thank you so much, Kirsten Anderson, for staying up till midnight. Absolutely amazing effort. And just a great effort for anyone that joined us and participated. I think we all left feeling pretty invigorated. I felt really great after having a conversation with all of you and hearing how you were navigating these times, and also just playing some fun games. And Wanda brought a puppet into the call as well, which was so funny. So he just disappeared off the screen, and then this massive Muppet face just appeared. It was hilarious. Maybe one of those things that you had to be there for. Anyway, join us next time. I just want to share something on the flip chart. Christine Burrich, she said she shared some amazing photos, and this was her share. Not only did we manage to squeeze a week-long residency training program into 3 days virtually, but participants were fully engaged. Agility and a good sense of humour and fun were mandatory. Thankfully, we also had a client who, albeit was nervous, said, run with it. 26 global leaders, 6 time zones, and we made it work. Rethink how you present. There are opportunities. So we're all keen to hear how Christine did that. And as a result, I'm running a free webinar with Christine on this week. So if you're listening in real time, that's helpful. It's going to be on Thursday, the 24th of March at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's US Canada time, which is 8:30 p.m. on the same day if you're in London or Europe. And That's 6:30 a.m. for me in Australia on the Friday, the 25th of March. So details to register, it's free. We're going to have a conversation with Christine, see how she did it, and then open up for Q&A. And details to register are in the show notes over at firsttimefacilitator.com/episode 112. What else happened this week? The First Time Facilitator Bootcamp kicked off. We had session 1, which is all about begin with the experience in mind. It's to play on the Covey habit. Real focus on human behavior and taking it back to the fundamentals. And I also ran my first Go Live Before You Go Live. Now, this is a training session, an admin training session in Zoom. We had 6 people. We all dialed in just over an hour, and we each tested out different features, gave each other feedback on what we looked like, what our sound was like, did breakout rooms, used all the features. So we're confident when we actually dial on client calls. I learnt so much, and I think the value is in practicing. So if you'd like to be part of the next Go Live Before You Go Live training session, you can find out more details over at firsttimefacilitator.com/episode 112. Okay, now today I'm delighted to bring you a guest who I met through the Flipchart community as well. Ever since he joined, he has been super helpful, super gracious with his time, and his life has, like I said, changed in a couple of weeks. Jonas Rajanto helps people with remote work, especially when they gather around the virtual campfire. His mission is to train groups and organizations, large and small, and he aims to make people feel that their time was well spent and with a purpose during virtual team meetings. He works for a company called Great People over in Finland, and he initially started out in the IT services industry where he developed tools and processes for more efficient collaboration. So he's got a developer background, and I think that's really great that he's bringing his skills into facilitation, because as a facilitator, Jonas specializes in telecommuting and virtual collaboration now. He coaches team leaders, project managers, trainers, salespeople, and others for whom web opportunities are an integral part. And I think that's pretty much all of us now. Jonas's mission is to make telecommuting as natural as working in the same room. In this show, we talk about the energy required to facilitate online workshops, how we can build trust early on in our virtual experiences and interactions. And Jonas also shares some of his favorite tech tools for getting interaction in group settings. I also love his story, his career story, and how he's now evolved to the engineer who can speak human. I also want to take this opportunity to really thank Jonas for the contribution he has brought to the Flipchart Facebook group. His responses to questions on anything virtual are, like I said, incredibly helpful, simple to follow, and comprehensive as well. So contact details if you'd like to say thanks to Jonas for everything that he shares in this interview and find out how he and Great People can help you in moving workshops and experiences online. You can find his details over in the show notes again. And if you are housebound and podcasting isn't working for you because you're no longer commuting, this episode is also on YouTube. We videoed our chat, which you can find again in the show notes. And of course, I keep referring to the Flipchart. We'd love to see you in there. We've got over 690 facilitators from all over the world. Heaps of people are sharing their favorite online resources as well. This is probably one of the longest intros I've had. There's been a lot going on in the week. Now, onto the show. I am delighted to welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast, Jonas Rajanto, who is in Finland. Welcome to the show, Jonas.
Thank you, Leanne. Nice to be here.
Bit of context on this one. It's great to have you here. We booked this interview about a month ago. Now, in the last, I think it's been about 7 days, Jonas has turned into the most popular man in Finland, if not the world, because he's also known as the remote meeting guy. So first of all, we'll get a bit of background on your career history. Then I really want to talk to you about how your last sort of couple of weeks have been. So tell us, how did you find what you do today? Or what were the career pivots that led you down this path?
All right. There's always been 2 themes in my life. One has been technology, and then a theme that emerged later in my life was people. So I'm going to tell you a short story about the phases in my life that led up to this point. It all started with, I got introduced to technology in 1989. I was 6 years old. My dad was an IT manager. He worked like I was at his workplace during the weekends. He worked a lot. And then I played around with a Unix terminal. So one of those dumb terminals with those really loud, clunky keyboards and just a monochrome screen, just green and black. And what I did was I was drawing with asterisks in a word processing program. I was drawing cars and trees. And that's how it all began. And then I saw a TV ad when I was 8. a TV ad about Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega game console. I was like, what? What is this? I have to have this. And I wished that for my birthday. I got it. It was the best day of my life. And for the next several years, all I cared about was video games. It so completely immersed me. It took my imagination away. And for several years, all I thought was, how could I get my hands on all the video games in the world? And at the time, it seemed humanly possible to get your hands on all the video games in the world. Not anymore. But yeah, that was my life. And I remember my teenage years as being the nerd or the geek or whatever other, like, it was a derogatory term in the 90s to be a nerd. And now it's kind of oh, you're a nerd. Wow, you're probably cool. But yeah, those were the days. And I was really socially awkward back then. Like, really. I was bullied a lot because I just didn't share humor with others. I didn't understand what they were laughing at, and they had never understood what I was laughing at. I felt like I was a lot in my just own imaginary world. I was interested in completely different things than my peers. I got along with adults, but not with my peers. And it wasn't until my 20s that I started to realize that I can do something about this social awkwardness. In fact, it changed quite a lot when I went to the States. That's why I don't sound like a Finnish person when I'm speaking English. I sound more like an American because I spent a year in Texas. Well, I lost the Texan twang pretty quickly, but I still have the American accent left from that. But when I was in exchange, people started paying attention to me in a way like never before. I was like, so this is what it feels like to be a popular person. And it started to change my perspective of myself as well. And so I got interested in personal development. I participated in theater in school, and I got a sales job. I worked for 3 years part-time as a sales clerk selling home electronics. And slowly, I started to become more and more interested in people. Like I got interested in psychology, linguistics. I've always been a language geek as well. I grew up with 3 languages, Finnish, Swedish, and English. And then in school, I started learning German and French. And then I've learned some Spanish. And
I just know Australian.
And I love Australian. I'm going to get to that in a moment. So yeah, I was selling electronics, and I started to become more and more interested in customer service and what makes a good experience. I already had quite a few years of experience as tech support. Obviously, people came to me for all kinds of problems with computers and later also smartphones. So I always had this kind of service mentality. Okay, so then I got my first real IT job in the IT service sector. I had almost graduated as an engineer, IT engineer. So that was my training. But then everyone knew me as the engineer who can speak human. So I was the guy in the company who could actually speak to people and engage with them. And so that was my identity for some time. I was like, yeah, I'm a proud geek who can speak to people. And I fell in love with documentation at the time. I was a system administrator for a documentation system, and I trained people how to use it, and I developed all sorts of practices. I got interested in organizational development as well. I did lots of training. Then I felt like it stagnated, so I took a year off, traveled the world, and one of those legs on that trip was Australia. So I took it with my wife, 10 months total, 3 years in Australia. We flew into Sydney, went to Melbourne. From there, we flew to Cairns.
Right up north?
Yes. Had to practice that for a while. It's not Cairns or anything like that. It's Cairns.
Cairns.
Love it. And then we bought a used car, drove it down to Brisbane, spent, I think, a week there, then flew to New Zealand, and it goes on. I really loved the culture over there. I think I related even more to the New Zealanders, to the Kiwis, because they're even more spread apart. Like Finns and Kiwis, we have about the same size country. We're about as far apart from each other, and we like solitude. Australians were more outgoing to my
interesting.
Yeah, in my experience.
Yeah.
I loved it. It's so nice to follow the podcast. I love your accent.
Thank you. I actually had a few listeners. I put out surveys, why do you listen? Like, I like your accent. It's like, oh, thanks. There's like hundreds of thousands of other Australian podcasts, but thanks for tuning into this one for the accent. So can you share with listeners, what do you do now and why are you so in demand in this moment?
All right. The biggest pivot was really a few years after that. I did some more marketing, consulting, and then I stumbled onto this company, Great People. Small company, purely focused on facilitation. A friend gave me a tip, said, hey, this company is looking for a virtual facilitator. My first question was, a virtual what? Okay, let me Google facilitation. And I was like, oh, this seems interesting. And I had a coffee with the CEO. We were supposed to meet for an hour. It lasted for an hour and a half at least. And I was like, I need to get to know these people. So people experts. Wow. What would it be like to work with people who are people experts instead of computer experts? And suddenly my identity just had a huge shock. I had been used to being the geek who can speak people, and now suddenly I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm now the engineer. I'm the people consultant who can speak computer. And everything was flipped around. And my identity was in question for a long time. I was like, who am I now? What is this? But after some time, I've realized that it's a great fit. I can use all of the skills I've acquired up to this point. So all of that computer background means that I feel at home with tech. It doesn't matter what platform we're using. I play around with it for a few minutes, and then I'm like, all right, this is how it works. And then I help others get over the anxiety that technology usually produces, so we can talk about the real stuff. Why are we here? What are we trying to do? So I think that's always been my skill, that I help people get over that first threshold. I can't focus on anything because this computer is in my way. I'd like to turn that around so that people think, I can do amazing things thanks to this computer.
Yes. If you're listening, you won't see what Jonas just did with his hands, but I often see people that are battling with technology. They sort of just fumble around and get really frustrated. You can see their stress levels rise, and then they just call IT and it's all too much. That happens in Australia as well, as I'm sure it does around the world. Just quickly going back to your story, I think we were born in the same year. So I was born in 1983. You were the same?
Same year.
Yep, because I remember Sonic the Hedgehog and having the Game Gear, and I just played it.
Oh, yeah.
My favorite. I was lucky my brother was a computer engineer, so I sort of grew up doing a bit of coding as well, making my first website when I was about 11.
Right.
Not to the extent that the path that you're on in terms of your skills. Now, things have turned in the last couple of weeks for you, and everyone in Finland is working from home. What are they calling you about? What are the most sort of common questions that you're getting at this point of time?
Well, I can now see how many people were still not anywhere close to this remote working. Like, I've lived in a bubble where remote working is a norm. I've lived in a bubble where people are familiar with tech. Well, obviously, I've started to come out of that bubble because I worked with a lot of corporate groups where people have always just done the bare minimum regarding technology. So they learn as much as they need to survive in their jobs, but they never go beyond. There's a subset of people who work in offices who are curious and like to explore. But most people just try to get by, and that means learning the minimum so that I can do my job. But they're always one step behind, right? Because technology evolves so fast. And now I can see all of the people who never tried anything, and they're like, oh my God, what do I do now? I'm a therapist, or I'm a teacher, or I'm a yoga instructor, and I have to do everything remotely, or a dance instructor. How do I make this work? How do I get people to interact, come online? How do I survive with the technology? Like, what devices do I even need? Do I need headphones? They have a million questions related to everything from what kind of computer will I need, to which meeting software should I use, to how do I run a 200-person workshop? All of the questions at once.
So do you have you created like a Google Doc of all your frequently asked questions?
You know what? I tried to start a project like that a few years ago because I realized that by now I have helped thousands of people, friends, relatives, friends of relatives, colleagues, clients. There were so many people I had helped, and I had answers to so many questions. And I noticed the digital divide was just growing. So the things that you can do with tech, the things that are required so you can participate in society, and people's skills were completely out of alignment. And I thought, there's no national service that gives information in Finnish about digital technology. Like, where do you start? What can you even learn? What should you learn first? And I started to compile my knowledge into these blog posts and organize everything. And soon I was like, I should probably write a book about this. Or maybe I should do a website that has like articles and videos, or maybe this could be an academy, like a virtual academy where people can learn and then teach each other. And I became obsessed with the idea for about a year. I was pretty close to turning it into some sort of company. I didn't really know what the financing was going to, like, how was I going to make money off it? I had no idea. And that's when I ran into great people and I just shelved the idea. So basically I have, I don't know how many hundreds of pages of material from various stages in my life that I could compile into a book or a website. For now, I'm content with doing these trainings. I'm learning a huge amount about group psychology and leadership for sure, which is what I'm most interested in right now. So we'll see what it turns into. Might turn into anything in the next 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. When it involves with, particularly when you're learning all these sort of people skills and you're adding that to the technical stuff that you'd acquired. The reason I asked that was there was a LinkedIn post the other week. I was talking to someone about Microsoft Teams on LinkedIn, and then you, Jonas, you chime in and you're just so good, because I struggle sometimes with Teams, and like I'm Team Zoom. I love Zoom. I find Microsoft Teams just too clunky and annoying to get permission if you're an external provider. And the amount of information that you wrote on there, I was absolutely astounded. So I was just thinking, I hope this guy like didn't just write this from scratch and he's got some kind of tool that he's cutting and pasting from. But
most of those conversations just come out of so much experience. I find that my approach to learning tech is pretty rare. It's not unique, but it's rare. Some people are like me. So they find a new piece of software or a new service. The first thing they do is they click through every single menu. So they map it out. What is this made of? There's a Finnish saying to find out what kind of animal it is. What has it eaten? And that's the first thing. What is this eaten? So I'm trying to find out, what is it supposed to do? Who is it for? What are the limitations? How has it been designed? And then I take something away from it. I realize, okay, this tool is built for this. It might be useful for this. And I categorize everything in my mind just by learning how, and it's like I have the association that, okay, you need a simple mind mapping tool. This is the right one. You need to do group work with the simplest possible tool, Google Docs. So all these associations come up, and when a person asks any question, I usually don't have ready material in written form.
Yeah.
I just like, hey, I know. And then by typing it out, I'm learning myself.
Yes.
I noticed that Juanda, who you've interviewed before, has a similar process. I sense that he does this too. He writes these long posts. It's his learning process.
That is really interesting. By contributing to the group, you're actually refining your thought process.
Yeah. I'm learning as I type.
Yeah, I love it because you guys are in different time zones. So I wake up in the morning and it's like the J's have just been like dueling on, or just like commenting. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot keep up. I think he's an engineer as well, actually. I love that. That's so good. Thank you so much for crossing over to the bright side, to the people side. So I guess the common question we often get is, and I ran a couple of webinars today, and getting that engagement in webinars, there's a lot that's going on in someone's head, getting on video and how they might not be comfortable with that, contributing when it's like one person at a time. As a facilitator, someone that goes virtual quite often, how do you get that trust when it comes to these workshops that are online and you don't have the luxury of getting that face-to-face interaction?
All right. I think the key thing is that people need to be seen. They want to be seen, and they need to feel like, when I'm seen, I can trust others. So how to make them visible? That's the problem in remote sessions. When we're in the same room, all we need to do is clear the tables and put people in a circle. Problem solved. People can see each other. After a few moments with some good icebreakers, people start to feel like I'm seen and respected by others. My voice, people want to hear what I have to say. It's a lot harder to create that remotely, or at least we don't have the same mechanisms. So we have to kind of engineer the trust. I think, in a sense, that's what facilitators do anyway. The process is social engineering. We're creating the structure for people to feel safe and be themselves, and so that they can lean into the work and forget themselves for a moment and just discover something together. I think it's beautiful, but it's really hard to do remotely. So what can we help with? The same thing, use icebreakers, but the icebreakers look and feel quite different. get them to talk about any topic that's beside the working topic for the day. One of my favorite starting methods is picture cards. I've shared this on the Flipchart group as well, an image of picture cards. So I put on one slide, let's say 10 or 12 images that just randomly chosen off the internet. And then I number them from 1 to 10, 1 to 12. The instructions are choose the picture that X. And then you can complete this with choose the picture that tells how your day began, how your day has gone so far, how your last weekend was, how you feel about this upcoming project. And then you just you start with yourself and say, okay, I will choose picture 7 today. And that's because, well, I feel a bit nervous, but excited at the same time. I'm appearing on this podcast and I really like it, you know, and then you share your emotional state. You become visible to the others, and now the others have an example. How long should I speak? On what emotional level? I mean, this is the same thing as face-to-face, but it's even more important when we don't have real eye contact, when we can't read body language very well. So hearing people's tone of voice and what kind of story they tell is extremely important. But I usually tell a 20-second story, and then I ask a few people to say, okay, John, you picked number 3. Can you tell me why you picked that picture?
Okay, so you're really directing the conversation as well. So looking at chat and going, okay, John, number 3. So instead of like leaving it hanging like who wants to go next, you're saying,
yeah, and
hey,
I feel that's very necessary. So any uncertainty is going to reduce my participation. I'm going to be more passive the more uncertain I am. So in the beginning, I try to reduce uncertainty in all the ways that I can. I've maybe done a systems check in advance, like a separate session where we just sign into the meeting, try out the tech, and whatever tools I want the participants to use during my session, we try them out. And then they have a chance to ask questions. And then once we are about to start our session on the day, they're a lot more confident and relaxed. So I try to do that in advance. And then the icebreaker, I try to keep it simple and keep it straight. So, and the larger the group, the harder this is. If you have 10 people in the call and you say, okay, who wants to go first? 4 people are going to speak at the same time if they're American. And then you have 15 seconds of silence if they're Finnish.
Yes.
So either way, it's not working very, very well. And one way to solve that is just to address specific people. And that's really scary if you're the first one to go, right? You're putting people on the spot. But if you start with yourself, you've already given them an example. They're not the first one to go anymore. So that's why I share first. Then I ask a few people. If it's a large group, maybe I'll ask 4 or 5 people. If it's Zoom that I'm using and it's really easy and quick to do a breakout session, I'll use that moment to do a breakout session and just tell them, all right, now that you've chosen a picture and thought of your story, I'll send you into breakout rooms. We'll do a short peer discussion, 3 minutes, just share your story of how your day began. And we'll get back here in a moment. I'll start the breakout session now. Click.
That is so good. I can tell that you've done that before. That instruction was delivered really well. Very much more
times
than my one this morning, experimenting with breakout rooms. Awesome. So with interaction, and it's great that you use Zoom. I love Zoom as well. It seems like everyone's looking for something else, but it seems like it's industry standard and the one that's sort of most reliable. We're recording this over Zoom, this podcast interview. So that's your icebreaker. Important to get people feeling certain. I love the way that you demonstrate that by sharing your story. How about, say, if you've got like a 1-hour workshop that you're facilitating virtually, how do you piece through interaction through that? Do you have a sort of set time thing? Do you say, right, every 10 minutes, I'm going to throw in something interactive? Or how do you design the interaction into your workshops?
Okay, so here's an interesting tidbit. Up until a week ago, virtual workshops were very, very rarely on the table. People weren't really looking to do workshops because it was so far from what they could imagine that could be done remotely. So people were looking for remote meeting skills training or remote leadership training if they were managers. I would say that maybe no more than 5% of everyone I trained was interested in actually doing virtual workshops. And also because we're a small company, and I was doing virtual all by myself. Everyone else was doing face-to-face. That's all changed now, of course. But no one else was really interested in getting into, like, deeply into virtual facilitation. Everyone was like, no, I like the face-to-face interaction.
Yep, me here. Yep. I'll put my hand up for that.
And I love it too. The truth is, I love it too. If I could decide freely how to work, I would probably work 50% face-to-face and 50% virtually. But because of I was specialized, right? But so we didn't have plenty of resources to market virtual workshops. So I haven't done very many. I can speak more from a reference point of we always have a workshop-style training session. So I'm training remote meeting skills. We usually try to get people for a bit longer than an hour, because an hour's time, you need to get over the tech. You need to get over your nervousness with being online with a group of people in an interactive session. You need to become comfortable with the controls of everything. And then we can start talking about the topic. So we usually like to reserve 2.5 hours. That's long enough that we have plenty of time. We can have a break in between. Maybe we can do an energizer. We can try out different tools. We can discuss, what does this mean for your work? We can have those discussions. And it's not so long that we can have it like before lunch or after lunch as a half-day session pretty easily.
Nice one.
How do we then build in interaction? The first 15 minutes is an interactive start. So we do the sound check. I ask everyone to say hello, write something in the chat. If there's a whiteboard, maybe ask people to draw something on the whiteboard. Then there's the start, purpose, agenda, way of working, and then we do the icebreaker. After that, I try to have maybe 10 minutes of speaking, slides, lecture, whatever you call it, and then some short exercise like what were the key insights for you from the last section? The options are write in your own notes, and then we'll do a breakout session. Write in the chat, or write in your personal notes, and then we'll do a breakout session, or we'll all start writing immediately on a whiteboard, something like that. Often the interaction just means, let's try this tool. Like, people have thought about something personally for 3 minutes, written down something on paper, and then I open a whiteboard, and then I ask, all right, let's have a few people just tell me what you wrote down. What about George? And then I write things down on the whiteboard as they speak, and then I ask the next person. I would use this in a pretty small group, let's say 6 or 7 people.
Yeah.
And then once 3 or 4 people have spoken, then I will actually open the floor for anyone to speak. So what would you like to add to the conversation? What hasn't yet been said? It's a lot easier to participate in that once you've written down even at least something, anything.
Yeah, it's not right? A blank slate.
It's hard to participate, on a blank slate. But then when there's something, it's easier to participate. So I ask a few people to go first after they've had some time to think about for themselves.
It's really clever. I think what you're saying is just a clever adjustment of what we'd do in a face-to-face workshop, but it's being a bit more, I think the language about the instructional delivery is really important. I think that's the difference. I think for anyone, including myself, trying to pivot what we do face-to-face to an online environment, what I'm figuring out that's most important very quickly is how we give those instructions and how specific we really are. And also knowing what the options are available to us before we go into and hop onto a Zoom chat and just go, right, share in the, because this morning I was like, okay, just share in the chat. Every time it was the chat, but I didn't think of ideas like the whiteboard or even just being tactile and using your own notepad. So I think you're opening up some really great ways, really practical ideas for all of us. So thank you so much. In terms of tools, we could go on about this. This is like a whole other podcast episode, but do you have what are your favorite, the most essential when people are calling you around Finland going, we need to go online, we need to go virtual? What kind of things are you recommending to them in terms of tech and the tools they can use? Okay, so here's another feature about the way that I do my work, because we mostly train corporate groups, and then in the public sector, they're usually larger organizations, and people don't usually get to choose the tools. They have set tool. I think this is actually changing now. We're in a situation where people have to adopt new tools no matter what the rules are. But up until a week ago, the rules were, in most organizations, use the tools the organization provides. So either they were in the Microsoft ecosystem, and that means they had Teams, Word, Excel, OneNote, and a bunch of other tools. Or they were in the Google ecosystem, and then they had all the Google Docs and Hangouts. Or maybe they were using Zoom, and then I would ask, all right, so
what can we use with Zoom? Do you have Microsoft apps, Google apps? What do you use? For instance, maybe you've heard of Confluence, or maybe not.
No.
Does it say anything? Okay, it's an Australian product from Sydney. Atlassian produces a huge range of software products. Confluence is their documentation software, the one that I administrated for 3 years in one of my previous jobs. Absolutely love it. It is highly interactive. That's why it was so fascinating to see how documentation can actually live through the comments that people put into it. Confluence was how I discovered what live documents are like. It was amazing.
Wow.
Anyway, Confluence was one of our clients had Zoom and Confluence, and I was like, all right, I can build a workshop on top of Confluence. 12 concurrent editors is the maximum. But let's just divide the whole group into groups of 12. So 12 people per session, and then we'll see how it works when we collaborate in real time on Confluence pages. So I don't usually get to choose the tools. The client chooses the tools. If I don't know them already, I learn how to use them, and then I build a process on top of that, and then I teach that process to the participants.
And any favorites? Because you've had such exposure to all of them. Zoom
is my favorite because it's so feature complete when it comes to facilitating groups. The breakout rooms feature is a killer feature. Also, there's so much control. I really love Zoom in that sense. Teams is evolving and becoming better all the time. And I think Teams it really shines in large organizations or in projects. So if I'm working with a large organization and people are comfortable working in Office 365, I really enjoy working with Teams. And once Microsoft Whiteboard evolves to the point where it works on all devices and it works across organizations, that's going to be my favorite visualization tool. Microsoft Whiteboard is very, very promising. It's going to be free for anyone who uses Office 365. That's why it's so compelling. There's no barrier to entry. We usually talk to HR. Those are the ones who buy training. And then there's like, all right, so could we use this tool? I'm not sure. We'll have to talk to IT. Okay, let's forget about that. Let's not go talk to IT, because I know that's where the conversation is going to end. IT is going to say no anyway.
Yeah.
That's usually the story. So Microsoft Whiteboard is one of my favorites. Mural is very, very promising. I haven't had a chance to use it a lot, but it seems like they are really, really into this visual digital facilitation thing. Miro is another one that's very, very good. I've used that a bit more than Mural, but I'm starting to think that Mural is maybe better for our clients. So those are my favorite apps because they're so versatile. And there's a Finnish one that I have to mention, which I think deserves special mention, is HowSpace.
Okay.
It's been around for a few years, and it's designed for digital facilitation. It's basically a website that you can throw together in a few minutes. It's built out of modules, so you can have chat, you can have voting, you can have brainstorming, there's word clouds. They've thrown together all sorts of different facilitation tools into one big platform, and you don't even need an account to sign in. Everyone gets a personal link into their email. They click it. There's no password. Let's start working.
That's awesome.
Worth checking out. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll put a link to all of those tools that you mentioned in the show notes so listeners can have a click around and experiment while they're learning on the go, as am I. Now, I've had, I think this is my 7th hour of Zoom calls today. This is really unusual. Okay, maybe you're used to it. I'm certainly not. My friend Steph, we recorded a quick podcast today just talking about the COVID situation. And she's like, I think I've got a sore throat, but I don't think it's that. I think I've got Zoomitis. Like just been talking so much on Zoom. Like that is such a cool phrase. Love it.
Oh, yes.
So how do you maintain your energy when you are just on these calls? I feel like I've got to dial up the energy more than I would in real life.
Oh, yeah. I can relate to that. So the situation has escalated for me as well. I mean, I wasn't in calls all the time before COVID. I would say that I was in training or in meetings no more than 15 hours a week. And the rest of the time was developing, marketing, planning, preparing, documenting. So there was all these auxiliary work that's needed. And I have auxiliary roles at our company. I have a small company. I'm also our IT manager, and I do some of our marketing. So I had a full-time job before this, and now I have 2 full-time jobs or something like that. We're getting it under control slowly. But this is new for me as well. I haven't been on calls this much. But the way that I see it is it's harder to communicate your energy when you don't have body language. And you need to give people energy when they're trying to learn anything new. And I see workshops the same way as training is learning something new. I have to shift something in my head. I have to learn how to do things in a new way. I have to think in new ways. I have to come up with new concepts. There's a lot of pressure. And so people need energy. And if you can't communicate it with your body language, how can you? The voice is really the only thing that we have. You can do something with the design, like building in that interaction, making it a bit fun and light, dropping an energizer somewhere. You can do eye exercise. And there's this great Finnish cartoon artist that did. It was this frog, and it was in a local accent. So if you read it in Finnish, it sounds funny just reading it out loud because it's in a wacky accent. And then there's the frog doing things like there's a fly going from the top right corner into the bottom left corner of your vision. And then you have to move your eyes according to the instructions. And it's to prevent eye fatigue, but I thought it was a superb energizer for any virtual session.
Wow, I love that. I'll Google it, but if you can send the link through, that sounds really fun. Yeah, you're right. I think maybe it's because I am doing a lot with my face, like trying to put all my body language into just what's above my neck.
Just the face. And perhaps your hands. You can do something with your hands.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, Mark Bowden told me that. Can't forget them. Every time I go into video, I'm like, use your hands. Super important. So do you have any tips for facilitators that are now making this, like this show is called First Time Facilitator, but I feel like for the next sort of couple of weeks or months, who knows, it'll be First Time Virtual Facilitator. What are your sort of tips or advice for someone that's just starting out? Like what can you tell them that might sort of encourage them, motivate them, help them learn, accelerate the process?
Well, there are a few things that I tell everyone at the end of my training sessions, that you've now received a lot of information. It's up to you what you do with that information, but there are some recommendations. One is that practice a ton. I referred earlier to the curiosity of just clicking through every menu, going through the settings, and looking through every setting. What can I do with this? What's even possible? Just by going through the settings, you might spend, depending on the program, it might take you 5 minutes, or it might take you an hour to click through all the settings if it's not like a ERP program, which has 100,000 settings. It usually takes you no more than maybe 20 or 30 minutes to go through all the settings, and then you'll learn a ton. What is this designed for? What's possible? Where do I see limitations? If anything is unclear, contact the developers and ask, I would like to do this with your product. Is it possible? And they can tell you whether or not it's possible. So that's one. Just practice a ton. If you're using Zoom for the first time, it's good to have two computers so you can see the facilitators or the host's view and the participants' view, because they're not going to be the same. And the same applies now to everything. In face-to-face situations, everyone's experience is the same. We share the same physical space, the same air, the same odors, everything, like the same chairs. You know, if the chair is hard, everyone's chair is hard. And now we have no other shared context. Well, that's a different story. But the point is that you don't know what the participant is going through, so you have to simulate the participant's experience. So practicing with a pair is really useful. Switch roles. One is the host, the other is the participant. Try to follow your own instructions that you've written from the participant's point of view, and then see, all right, this screenshot doesn't make sense because I'm not seeing the same thing. I need to take a screenshot of this situation from the participant's view.
Yes.
Right?
Good
so there are
point.
all of these details of how was the experience different. And there's the nightmare of, is the experience different on a Windows and a Mac machine or on a mobile device?
Do you work on a Mac or do you work on a PC?
I work on a PC. I've worked on both, but some years ago I decided to move to PCs. I think it was Windows 7. That was when the Windows interface evolved to a point where I thought, this is actually decent. I was a Mac fan for many years, and then I was like, this is actually pretty good. And I did a lot of gaming. I still do. And Windows is better for gaming. I didn't want to have two operating systems to play with, so I went all Windows. But I'm proficient in both. I'm agnostic. I'm not a fan of anything. I love all technology. And I try to get acquainted with everything. But it's very challenging to produce instructions for people that work on every single platform.
Yes.
It means you need several sets of instructions. And those products keep evolving. The Teams interface changes every 3 months. And so my instructions are out of date all the time. Video instructions would be the best, but I don't have the time to update video instructions all the time. So it's hard, but the best thing you can do is to at least get to know, so you know what's going through the minds of the participants because you know what they're seeing on their end. So if you can assist them in real time, that's the best option. And then the next best thing is doing instructions so they know beforehand, okay, this is what's going to happen and this is how this works. You can do all those visual aids.
That's really good advice. Yes.
And then don't go it alone. That's the most important thing. Don't go it alone. Practicing with a colleague, and then practicing with a familiar group, and then slowly expanding your comfort zone so that once your confidence rises, once you're more proficient with the tool, you try some more advanced methods. You try a longer session. You try to introduce new kinds of icebreakers. And then you can expand your range slowly to the point where like, yeah, we would like to run a 100-person workshop, a full-day workshop with teams. And you're like, sure, can be done. No problem. It's going to cost a lot of money, but it can be done.
That is like black belt virtual facilitation. I love that idea about sort of buddying up and getting a group. We did the first Go Live Before You Go Live session this morning. I just got a bunch of people, 5 or 6 of us all around the world.
How was it?
Amazing. We needed more time. We were just sort of geeking out on everything. We just took turns in the co-host chair and getting feedback on things like, even just audio, what you look like, where you're looking at into the camera, putting out polls, sharing results, breakout rooms, all of it. It was awesome. It was really good. All recorded so we can all look at that video and reflect on, what are we doing?
And I'm guessing there was a lot of fooling around and laughing.
Yes. One of the participants, I won't say any names, but she shared her screen and then started talking about what was on the screen. And we're like, we can't see it. We can't see it. So like, right, instruction. When you share your screen, just confirm. Use the chat or raise hands to confirm that everyone can see what you see. Because she was telling a great story, but we're like, we can't see the images. So the first thing
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have no idea what you're sharing.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, And it was a great story. Unfortunately, we just couldn't see what was going on. It was a lot of fun. And I think how I framed that was like, guys, this is Zoom. We can't break anything. Just if anything fails, just refresh, get back in. You'd rather fail now than in front of your client. So that's really great advice. Jonas, if people would like to connect with you and just find out just everything that you do, and I know you're really busy at the moment, but surely you'd love a few more phone calls and texts and SOSs from around the world. Where can we send
Fortunately, I have colleagues who can help me with that.
That's awesome. What's the best contact for you?
All right. So you can reach us by email. It's easy. service@greatpeople.fi. So that's grapes as in wine grapes.
Yeah, you hear grape, you think, oh, great people, which I love. I love that it has that.
Great people. Yeah, that's what most people hear. It's like, I agree, but the name is actually Grape People.
Yeah, with a P. Great with a P. Fantastic. And put a link to your LinkedIn profile as well.
For sure.
And
Jonas, I'd love to connect.
You've got a Facebook group as well, don't you? Or you're part of the Finnish... Your Facebook group's been going nuts too.
Absolutely. I'm part of the Finnish Association of Facilitators, and there's a Facebook group for that. About 2 years back, I realized that maybe there should be a separate group for virtual facilitation because it's such an obscure topic. Certainly not everyone is interested in that, right? So I created this group, and it was kind of dormant for a couple of years. We had maybe 200-300 members, but there wasn't a lot of conversation. And then it took off. At the beginning of this year, I invited a lot of people from the Association of Facilitators there, and now it's grown in 1 week to 2,000 plus members, and I don't know where it's going to stop. It just keeps growing and growing and growing.
Wow. And this is your moment. Everyone's got their spot in the sunshine. This is your time. So I know it's busy, but I think it's wonderful. And I think, you've done, just talking about your career history, everything you've done, you deserve to be where you are today. And we're very grateful. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with all of us.
It's great to be able to help at this scale. It's something I've hoped for my entire life. And now that opportunity is here, I'm not sure how to take it. So it's going to be adjusting for some time more. But I'm happy to accept the responsibility of helping a lot of people. We'll see what we can do there.
Amazing, Jonas. Thanks so much. Hey, thanks so much for sticking around. You've reached the end of another episode of the First Time Facilitator podcast. Connect with the show at firsttimefacilitator.com or follow me on Instagram at Leanne Hughes to find out what I'm up to during the week. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it with someone who will also appreciate the insight. And make it easier for yourself and subscribe to the show in your podcast player of choice. Thank you so much for listening, and chat to you next week.